Hello, everybody. Merry Christmas to all of you and welcome in. We are just 2 weeks from the conclusion of the 2024 NFL regular season. The playoff picture is starting to really take shape. A lot on the line these last 2 weeks, and I'm here to discuss it today and predict every game in week 17. Now, before we do that, as always, we need to recap my picks from the previous week. Last week was, in a word, mid for yours truly. A ton of misses. 9-7, which is technically over 500, but not good at all based on how I typically do. I thought the Broncos would beat the Chargers. That did not happen. I thought the Texans could upset the Chiefs. No, they couldn't. I was really off with my pick for Ravens Steelers. The Steelers never had a chance against the Ravens. The Eagles, I sort of feel like I got screwed there with Jalen Hurts getting injured, but Jaden Daniels still carved up the Eagles' defense. I trusted the Cardinals to get it done against Carolina. I won't make that mistake again. I thought Seattle could upset Minnesota. Honestly, they were pretty close to doing that. And, Tampa Bay just did not show up against Dallas. Do not ask me why. But my lock of the week was spot on. Honestly, I was too generous to the Saints. I thought the Falcons would blow out the Giants. I was correct in that. I thought the Lions would blow out the Bears. I was correct there. I thought the Bills would play the Patriots closer than everyone thought. I was correct there. But overall, 9-7 is not good enough. I need to be better, and I will be better beginning this week. Now, before we begin, as always, I remind you to leave a like if you enjoyed the video and to subscribe to my channel for more content like this. And if you want to be notified of future content, please click the bell icon. Let's begin. We begin with the first of two Christmas Day games with Kansas City and Pittsburgh. This is an important game for both sides, but I think that Pittsburgh needs it slightly more. So Kansas City's in a spot where they can lock down the number one seed with a win or a tie, but if they lose, they still control their destiny to the number one seed. The only way they could not be the one seed at this point is if they were to lose this week and next week to Denver and for the Bills to win out. So Kansas City could afford to drop this game and still be the number one seed. Pittsburgh, on the other hand, despite their 2-game losing streak the last 2 weeks against Philadelphia and Baltimore, they still control their destiny to the AFC North title. If they win this game and they beat Cincinnati at home next week, they would win the division. But if they were to lose this game, suddenly they would not control their destiny. Baltimore, assuming they win out, which they finished with Houston and Cleveland. If Pittsburgh loses this game and Baltimore wins out, Baltimore would win the AFC North. So based on all of this, Pittsburgh, without question, needs the game more. Some key injury updates. So Chris Jones sustained a calf injury against the Houston Texans last Saturday. It does not appear that he's going to play in this game. And since this is a game that, as I said, the Chiefs, they want it. They don't exactly need it. I don't think Chris Jones is going to play in this game. Also worth noting that wide receiver George Pickens is going to come back from an ankle injury. He's missed the last 3 games. He should help the Steelers' offense immensely. The Steelers are a field goal underdog at home. Mike Tomlin, as a 3-point underdog or less, tends to do very well. Since Pittsburgh's at home, they need the game more than Kansas City. I do like Pittsburgh to come up with an upset. 27-24. The second of 2 Christmas Day games, Baltimore at Houston. So as previously mentioned, the Ravens are in a spot where if Pittsburgh slips up, either losing to Kansas City or to Cincinnati in a week, they're in a position where they can win out and win the AFC North and be the 3 seed or the 2 seed if Buffalo just falls apart these last 2 games. I mean, they play the Jets and the Patriots. They shouldn't lose both of those. So Baltimore, despite having only one more win than Houston, Baltimore's 10-5. Houston's 9-6. Baltimore is a 5.5-point favorite on the road in this game. However, I think that makes perfect sense. So, this season, the Houston Texans are 1-4 against current playoff teams. So the one win was a 3-point win at home against the Buffalo Bills on a 59-yard game winner by Kaimi Fairbairn in a game that Josh Allen completed 30% of his passes. Color me unimpressed by that win. Otherwise, they got blown out by Minnesota, lost to Green Bay, lost to Kansas City, and lost a home game to Detroit in spite of the fact that Jared Goff gave them the ball 5 times. Baltimore, I believe, is an A-level contender that prevents similar challenges to the other 5 teams that I listed. Baltimore is playing its best ball at the right time. Lamar Jackson has been unbelievable all season. The Ravens' defense the first 10 weeks was atrocious, but since the first 10 weeks, since the road game against the Steelers, the Ravens' defense has quietly been one of the best units in the NFL. The Ravens and Texans met in last year's AFC divisional playoff round in a game that the Ravens stomped the Texans 34-10 and Lamar Jackson dominated. I expect this game to look similar to that. I think the Ravens cover the 5.5 on the road. Won't be quite as lopsided as last year's divisional playoff game, but I think the Ravens win this by 2 touchdowns. After a 2-game slate on Christmas Day, there is a game on Thursday night on Amazon Prime Video with Seattle visiting Chicago. Chicago at this point is a dead team walking. I think their losing streak's at 9. They've gotten blown out each of the last 3 weeks. At this point, I'm ready to say they're a free win for whomever they're playing. Seattle Seahawks, on the other hand, they've been a bit of a Jekyll and Hyde team all year. They're coming off on a 2-game losing streak, losing at home to Green Bay, losing at home to Minnesota. Weirdly, though, they have been a much better road team than home team. At the time this game will be played Thursday night, they will still be alive for the NFC West, so they will need the game to stay alive for that. In Chicago, it'd probably be in their best interest to lose this game for draft positioning. But Seattle, it seems like a lot of times when they play a vastly inferior team, they go to the wire with that team regardless of how bad they are. I think that's what's going to happen here. The Seahawks are 3.5-point favorites on the road. I think that's perfectly priced. I think Seattle wins by 4. I'll say 21-17. We'll do my lock of the week real quick here. Chargers at Patriots Saturday at 1 o'clock p.m. So the Chargers need to win this game for playoff positioning, and the Patriots need to lose this game for draft position. The Patriots played their Super Bowl last week against the Bills. Unfortunately for them, they came up short. And ultimately, at the end of the day, this is Jim Harbaugh with extra time to prepare against Gerard Mayo. Jim Harbaugh has a much, 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 much better team. And home field advantage since Tom Brady left really hasn't meant much of anything to New England. The Chargers, I believe, are 4-point favorites here. I think they cover that easily. Chargers 27, Patriots 10. This next one's a big one for the AFC playoff picture. Saturday, 4:30 p.m., Broncos at Bengals. So the Broncos find themselves in a position where their magic number, or they need to win 1 game to clinch a playoff spot. They're at Cincinnati this week, and then next week they have a home game against Kansas City. Worth noting that if I'm wrong and Kansas City beats Pittsburgh this week, Kansas City will have locked up the number 1 seed and will almost certainly rest all of their starters. So the Broncos have had an awesome season, but still a little bit of work left to do for them to clinch a postseason spot. So the Bengals, on the other hand, they're a long shot to make the playoffs, but it's not 0%. So the path for them into the playoffs is, obviously they have to win this game and they have to beat the Steelers in Pittsburgh next week to get to 9-8. They would need the Broncos to lose to Kansas City in a week. which, that could happen if Kansas City happens to need that game. They also need both the Colts and the Dolphins to lose once in these next 2 weeks. The Colts have a road game against the Giants and a home game against the Jags. Hard for me to see them losing a game. And Miami has a road game in Cleveland and a road game against the Jets, which, hey, winning in situation on the road in the cold, Tua Tagovailoa's track record in those spots, the Dolphins could lose one more. So it's a very long shot, but not zero. Obviously, the Bengals have to win this game. So a lot of people like the Bengals in this spot. So they're 3.5-point favorites, but quite frankly, I don't. That's for a couple very simple reasons. The first one, every team over 500 that they face this year, Kansas City, Washington, Baltimore, Philadelphia, who pounded them, Baltimore again, the LA Chargers, Pittsburgh. Every team over 500 that they faced, they've lost to. Most of them have been close, except for the Philadelphia game, but losses are losses. Their wins have come against the following teams: Carolina, the Giants, Cleveland, Las Vegas, Dallas, Tennessee, Cleveland again. Dallas might be mediocre, and we'll get to Dallas in a little bit. Every single other team that I listed there is awful. So, obviously the reason the Bengals have not been able to beat anyone over 500 is the fact that their defense has been the worst in the NFL all season. Everyone with the exception of New England, the Giants, Cleveland twice, and Kansas City, oddly, has moved the ball at will on them. A promising young rookie quarterback, Bo Nix, with an underrated group of skill players and Sean Payton. I think that the Bengals defense is going to get lit up once again by a good offense. Burrow and Chase, I need to say, Burrow and Chase have been phenomenal this year. Joe Burrow, if his team had 4 losses instead of 8, would be a real MVP candidate. And Jamar Chase might win the wide receiver triple crown this year. So I think that those guys will find a way to keep it close. But the Broncos are the better team with a much better defense. I love the Broncos to cover 3.5. I also like them to win outright. 34-31. So the final of 3 Saturday games involves the Rams hosting the Cardinals. So the Cardinals were eliminated from playoff contention last week with their overtime loss at Carolina. Meanwhile, the Rams currently lead the NFC West, and they're in a position where they can clinch the NFC West with a win here and a loss or a tie by the Seahawks. So the Cardinals weirdly dominated the Rams in the first meeting back in week 2. I think the score was like 41-10 or something like that. Put me on the record saying that was a fluke. The Rams are much healthier now than they were in that game. They were missing so many players in that game. And Arizona has just been an up and down team all year. And it seems like in general, they just can't beat good teams. And I'm not going to count an injury-ravaged Rams team back in September. Despite what happened earlier this year, Sean McVay has owned Arizona, and I think he'll do it again at home, 27-21. We finally reached the Sunday slate, and we begin with the 1:00 p.m. slate, as always. But there really aren't any good games in the 1:00 p.m. slate. Every game, at least one of the teams is eliminated from postseason contention. So I'm going to fly through these. I'm going to start with Jets-Bills. The way the Bills approach this game is going to hinge on the results of Christmas Day. So there is a scenario where the Chiefs beat the Steelers and somehow the Texans beat the Ravens. If that were to happen, the Bills would be locked into the 2 seed and they'd have nothing to play for. They'd probably sit Josh Allen in that case. Josh Allen did seem to injure his throwing hand against the Patriots last week, even though I don't think it's anything significant. If the Bills are in a situation where they can just afford to, sit Josh Allen, sit all of their starters. They have a lot of injuries right now. In this game, I think they'll do that and the Jets would win. However, if Christmas Day goes as I think it will, with Pittsburgh beating Kansas City and Baltimore beating Houston, Buffalo would still be alive for the 1 seed, and Pittsburgh and Baltimore, the Bills would need to keep winning to avoid falling to the 3. So, I'll just say that I expect this to be very similar to last week's Bills-Patriots game, where one team is obviously superior, but it's a divisional game, so it's kind of sloppy, closer than everyone expects. I'm going to go Bills 27, Jets 20. Following that, 2 NFC South teams, Carolina and Tampa Bay. So Tampa Bay blew the game in Dallas a week ago, and now they no longer control their destiny for the NFC South title. However, they're still very much alive. The Bucs finish with Carolina at home, followed by New Orleans at home, and New Orleans just got shut out in prime time. So even though the Bucs have struggled with the Saints in the past, I'd be very surprised if they do this year. Atlanta has a road game in Washington on Sunday night. More on that later. And if they were to drop that game, Tampa could win out and win the division. I like Tampa to bounce back here since they're at home and they're clearly the better team. Carolina has played teams tough with the exception of Dallas, weirdly. So I do think Carolina will keep this close. I think the Panthers are 8-point underdogs in this game. I think they cover that. I think the Bucs win by a touchdown. I'm going to go 27-20. Titans at Jags. This is just a battle for draft position. That's all it is. I'm just going to skip it. Jags 16, Titans 10. Up next, Dallas and Philly, the classic NFC East rivalry. So, Dallas has been playing better the past few weeks. So, as previously mentioned, they beat Tampa Bay last night on Sunday Night Football. They have been eliminated from playoff contention, but weirdly, they have too many wins to get a top 10 draft pick at this point. So, I don't think they're in a position where they're just going to say, screw it, we're not going anywhere. Both considering they have too many wins, and also they're playing the Eagles, whom they despise. And on top of that, all pressure's off. They're not in a situation where they need to win to keep their playoff hopes alive. But since they're the Dallas Cowboys, seeing what happens with them in the postseason every year before this one, I think that actually helps them. Additionally, the Cowboys have weirdly been a good road team this year. They're actually 5-2 away from AT&T Stadium. They have 2 losses, both by 6 points against the 49ers and the Falcons. They upset Washington on the road a few weeks ago. Carolina has been playing better the past few weeks, but not against them when the Cowboys went on the road. All of the cartoonish blowout losses they've had this season, New Orleans, Detroit, Philadelphia, Houston, all of those losses have come in Dallas. On the Philly side of the coin, their 1 seed chances took a huge hit, not only with the loss at Washington last week, but also with the injury to Jalen Hurts. So I'm recording this video Tuesday night, and the Eagles have not, how they log practice Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. The Eagles have not logged any of those practices yet, so it's hard to tell if Jalen Hurts is going to play in this game. But even if he does play, I don't think he's going to be 100%. And even if he does play, the fact remains that the Eagles at home this season against vastly inferior opponents, that would be Jacksonville in November, Cleveland back in October, when Nick Sirianni shaved his head, and Carolina just a few weeks ago. They've been a little bit sluggish, letting those teams hang around. And I'm actually going to put this down as my upset of the week. I think Dallas ends Philly's 1 seed aspirations 24-21. Following that, the Giants host the Colts. So, as previously mentioned, the Colts' playoff hopes are alive. I think they're slim, and actually, if the Broncos beat the Bengals, on Saturday. I think that if the Broncos, the Chargers, and the Ravens all win, I think that eliminates the Colts from playoff contention. But if the Chargers or the Broncos were to lose on Saturday, the Colts would still be alive to jump into a wild card spot. And they'd be in a situation where if Denver were to lose out, meaning lose to Cincinnati and then lose to Kansas City because the Chiefs would need that game, they could sneak in as a 7 seed if they win out. Obviously, they play the Giants this week, and they have Jacksonville at home the following week. I know they've had a tendency to struggle with Jacksonville, but that's only in Jacksonville. They tend to beat the Jags at home when they should. There's nothing to talk about with the Giants at this point. They're an automatic win for whomever they're playing. So yeah, Colts 27, Giants 14. This next one's another meaningless battle for draft position. Raiders at Saints. The Raiders are almost assuredly going to be picking higher than the Saints. Weirdly, a Derek Carr revenge game, except Derek Carr's not going to be playing. Derek Carr's with the Saints now. He used to play for the Raiders. I don't know. Saints 17, Raiders 13. So this next one, I gave strong considerations as my upset of the week for a few reasons. So Miami on the road, in the cold, in a must-win situation. In the past, Tua Tagovailoa has never played well. Actually, he's played very poorly in many of those spots. I'm not going to run through all the history of Tua Tagovailoa in these games, but it's not good. However, this Browns team is so bad and so lifeless that I can't do it. If Jameis Winston were starting this week, maybe, but he's not going to be starting this week. I think Cleveland is going to go with Dorian Thompson-Robinson, whom they love for whatever reason. The Dolphins are in a similar situation to the Colts, where their only path to the playoffs is winning out and Denver losing out. I think the Colts would have to drop a game as well, along other things, so it's a long shot. If this game's going to suck, I do expect Tua to play very poorly, but I think the Browns' offense will be even worse. Miami 20, Cleveland 7. Finally, we get to the first good game on the Sunday slate. The game of the week. I'm going to call it the game of the week. It's America's game of the week on Fox with Green Bay and Minnesota. So there's a lot at stake here. The Packers, even though they can't win the NFC North, because the Lions beat them twice, they're 2 games behind the Lions. Even if they and the Lions somehow end up with the same record, which is not happening, the Lions would have the tiebreaker. But the Packers can still jump up to the 5th seed if they beat Minnesota this week, and then they beat Chicago at home next week, which they will, and Minnesota loses to Detroit next week. Both teams would be 13-4, but the Packers would jump up to the 5 seed. Conversely, if the Vikings win, they're still alive for the NFC North and the 1 seed, and it would set up the game of the year in Detroit next week with 2 14-2 teams on Sunday night. Hintity hint hint to my Lions 49ers pick. The Packers would also be in danger of falling to the 7 in that case. Obviously, the Vikings would be ahead of them. The Commanders could jump them if they lose this game. And if the Packers were to fall to the 7, instead of going to Tampa Bay or LA, not saying those are easy games, but if you were to fall to the 7, you'd instead go to Philadelphia in round 1. So, yeah, the Packers do not want that. I can tell you that. These teams met back in week 4, and even though the final score of that game was 31-29, that game was 28-0 Minnesota, with like 30 seconds to go in the second quarter, and then a whole bunch of weird stuff happened. Jalen Naylor dropped a punt. Sam Darnold had a red zone pick. Sam Darnold had another fumble, which led to a Packers touchdown. I don't expect a 28-0 lead for either side in this game, but I do think Minnesota is the better team, and they are at home. Green Bay, oddly, is 2-4 this season against current playoff teams. Those 2 wins are week 5 in LA against the Rams, when the Rams were just ravaged by injuries. I don't think they had Puka Nacua or Cooper Kupp in that game. It was a 5-point win. And then a 2-point win at home against the Houston Texans. Those are good teams. I'm not going to deny that. But I don't think anyone thinks those are A-level contenders. They went to Brazil, lost to the Eagles in week 1. They fell down 28-0 at home against Minnesota in week 4. The Lions came to Lambeau in November. The Packers were down 24-3 in that game late in the second half. And then a few weeks ago, the Packers played Detroit tough, but came up short. Given all of these things, I like Minnesota. I think they get to 14-2 by winning 31-27. On Sunday night, Atlanta at Washington. So this one was flexed in place of Dolphins-Browns, which, I mean, obviously that one had to be flexed out. To be honest, I don't think this is a great game, but it's one of the better games of the week. So, take it or leave it. The Falcons are in a position where, with Tampa's loss to Dallas, if they win this week, they retain control of the NFC South. They're in first place right now, and all they would need to do is beat Carolina at home, which they should do, knock on wood, to guarantee themselves probably the 4 seed in the NFC, at least an NFC South, the NFC South title. Otherwise, if they were to lose, they would lose the lead in the NFC South if we assume Tampa Bay is going to beat Carolina at home, which obviously they should. I'd be very shocked if they didn't. And in that situation, they would need Tampa Bay to lose a home game to New Orleans the following week, which that's not going to happen either. So, in essence, this is a playoff game for Atlanta. Now, I don't think that the Falcons thought they'd be in this position a month ago. They've fallen apart after a 6-3 start. They lost 4 straight and benched Kirk Cousins for the rookie Michael Penix Jr. And even though they had a blowout win last week in Penix's debut, I'm going to chalk that up to they played the Giants rather than, they're on the right track. I think the Falcons are in real trouble here. They're an indoor team going outdoors on the road in the cold. In Washington, D.C., or not Washington, D.C., technically Landover, Maryland, in December. Jayden Daniels has been excellent this season. The Falcons' defense has been highly suspect, specifically their pass rush, which I think a pass rush is especially important to rattle a rookie quarterback like Daniels. I like Washington to win by double digits over Atlanta. I'm going to say 31-17. We conclude with Monday Night Football, a rematch of last year's NFC Championship game between the Lions and the 49ers in San Francisco. The 49ers were eliminated from playoff contention last week with their loss to the Dolphins. They've lost 5 of 6, but they do have a chance to play spoiler here against a team in the Lions that is currently in the running for the top seed in the NFC. However, I do not think it's happening for San Francisco here. When the schedule came out, this was, I don't know if it was the game, but it was certainly a game that the Detroit Lions had circled after what happened in the NFC Championship game last year. Of course, the Lions had a 24-0 lead at halftime and lost, and a lot went into that, from 2 failed 4th down conversions, a fumble by Jahmyr Gibbs, a couple other miscues. Really a devastating loss for the Lions. But yeah, they're gonna come to play in this game. They're gonna want their revenge, and the Lions are just a much, much better team than the 49ers right now. They're a much more physical team than the 49ers. I think the Lions handle the Niners pretty easily. I'm gonna go Lions 35, San Francisco 23. The Lions cover the 3.5 on the road very easily. And ladies and gentlemen, that will be all for today. I remind you to leave a like if you enjoyed the video and to subscribe to my channel for more content like this. If you'd like to be notified of future content, please click the bell icon You can go personalized notifications or all notifications, whatever floats your boat. Thank you again for tuning in, and I will see you all again next week.